What does Syracuse still need from the transfer portal? That is the question today. We are recording this on May 1st. May 1st was the deadline to put your name in to the portal for basketball. It was April 30th for football. So as long as your name is in, you can still move around in the college sports landscape. How aggressive will both Fran Brown and Adrian Autry continue to be in the portal now that all the names that need to be in are in? Something we'll discuss on Syracuse Sports. Looking forward to hearing from our Syracuse Sports insiders later in the program. Become a Syracuse Sports insider today by texting the word orange to 315-847-3895. Well, what does that mean, Brent? That sounds cool. An insider. Yeah, you're in the inside by getting direct text message access to me. You can text me anytime, and you're going to get my thoughts, any news that I have, any opinions that I have. You're going to get it first. Great back and forth, great questions, comments, thoughts, what you guys want to know about topics like this. Hey, what's going on the transfer portal, Brent? What's going on with this? That's what being a Syracuse Sports Insider is all about, and your thoughts on today's question coming up later on in the program. I got to say this first before we get into the topicality of the show. So I brought it up on the last show that we need a theme song for Syracuse Sports. So here's the deal. We post this here on YouTube, of course. Please subscribe, Syracuse Orange Sports on YouTube. We also post it on Spotify and Apple, which is basically an audio version, right? So the audio version of the pod is a little different than the YouTube version of the pod. There's a couple more bells and whistles, and it's easier to lay music down. Whereas with on the YouTube, we can do it. It's just the production's just slightly different. So I feel like we need a cooler bang and open, right, or theme song for the YouTube version of the show. And I brought that up on the last version, and you guys brought it. Our Syracuse Sports Insiders got some emails. People actually sent me some of their original music and sent me some ideas for the theme song. So I have to say this, guys. You had some really cool ideas. Like somebody texted me and was like, hey, you should start with the theme from Shaft because that's really cool. And I'm like, that is really cool, right? Here's the deal, though. We can't use licensed music, right? If it's a theme song, it's not like I can just use like the Beatles or the Rolling Stones here. Like if it's licensed music and we don't have the license for it, we can't use it. So think original music. Think of things that you know somebody that's got a band or you are a music creator. I heard from a few people that sent me some of their stuff. And I'll tell you what, guys, if you have original music and you send it to me, and you give me written permission to use it, I would love to somehow incorporate your music into the pod. Like, I still want to do an open for the show. And if that results from a submission from you guys out there, all the better. But I'd love to find a way just to incorporate your music into the podcast. And I think local music, not just local Syracuse bands. This pod reaches everywhere. So I'm stealing this from Tony Kornheiser, by the way, who does an amazing job with this on his podcast. If you have original music and you want to send it to me and I have your permission to incorporate it into the podcast, I'd love to find a way to do that, like transition between segments or something. Like I'm thinking out loud here. I'm totally just going off the cuff on this, but just like briefly in passing, bringing that up on the last pod, you guys came with the ideas. It's just we can't use licensed music that we don't have access to. So keep that in mind, right? So going forward, I'd love to experiment with that. If you have original music and we have permission to use it, let's do it. Let's figure it out, right? So appreciate all your feedback on that. That was a lot of fun. All right, so the question is this. What does Syracuse still need from the transfer portal? On the basketball front, I'm going to bring in Mike Waters here in just a few minutes to get his thoughts on the current roster, who they brought in, and who they could potentially bring in, Kadari Richmond included here. And mind you, I know like this pod could have a very short shelf life. This is leaving, the milk on the counter. Like it's going to expire pretty quickly, but I wanted to do it anyway because the deadline hit and it's like, okay, we know who's in, we know who's out. Let's figure this out. What does Syracuse still need? So Mike and I are going to do the basketball thing coming up here. On the football front, by far the most popular answer from you, one thing that Emily and I stressed after the spring game, it was great to talk to Charlie Loeb on the pod the other day, who gave us some insight on Carlos Del Rio Wilson and Jakari Williams, who he trains both of these players. but there is still, to me, a need at backup quarterback for Syracuse football. And lo and behold, this is so weird. So I was getting ready for this pod, and I don't want to sit here and just list a million names here because we could do an entire show just reading names out of the portal. But I swear to God, I'm going through this, right? I'm going through the list of quarterbacks on the pod. And I'm thinking, who would make sense for Syracuse? Because let's face it, guys, if you are a quarterback and you are in the transfer portal, you are not going into the portal to be a backup. But I think a lot of these guys know that is still a distinct possibility. So I'm going through the list of names and I'm thinking to myself, who makes sense? Now, this is Tuesday night, and I come across Christian Veilleux, Pittsburgh quarterback. Actually started against Syracuse last year at Yankee Stadium. He came in for Phil Dracovic, who got hurt, and then ineffective performance, who was a transfer in and of itself and a story of what can go wrong in the transfer portal, unfortunately for him. But I'm looking at Veilleux, and I'm thinking to myself, now here's a guy who's got experience. He's got size, 6'4", 220. He would know that he would be the backup to Kyle McCord. But the thing with him is he's got 2 years of eligibility left. So he would come in and know, I'm going to sit behind Kyle McCord. But given the drop-off that's there between McCord and what's there at the backup position now for Syracuse, look, Carlos Del Rio Wilson, I hope he continues to develop. I hope our guy Charlie Loeb continues to make him a better player. But there's just a need there for someone to step in and provide more competition in the room. I think Braden Davis is going to be moved to wide receiver. I don't think there's any question about that. Jakari Williams, you heard Charlie talking about him on the pod, talented kid, but to expect a freshman to come in and take that job is a big ask. And then your other two quarterbacks are preferred walk-ons that come in the fall. So if you can get a Veilleux to come in, provide you with some experience, some size. Now, he had 7 touchdowns, 8 interceptions last year, 51% completion percentage, just under 2,000 yards, or just over 1,700 yards, I should say, passing a year ago. But see, beggars can't be choosers here. That, to me, is the ideal backup quarterback for Syracuse. Someone that feels like they can compete for the job eventually, that has some experience, has some size, has been there. He was originally recruited by Penn State, transfers to Pittsburgh. Syracuse was actually recruiting him pretty hard a few years ago. So if they can land him, I think that is the ideal candidate and so hard to find out of the portal. A guy with a couple years of experience that kind of knows, like, I'm not starting day one, but maybe I've got a chance to compete for that job eventually. So go for it there. There's a picture on Instagram, Prime Steakhouse here in Syracuse. They host a lot of athletes, a lot of Syracuse dinners, not just Syracuse University, by the way. The Syracuse Crunch had a big dinner there before their playoffs began. It's a hot spot to see what athletes are in town. The owner likes to post pictures on the Instagram of Prime Steakhouse of like, hey, look who is here, right? And why wouldn't you when you've got all these famous athletes coming in? So Veilleux was there Saturday. It turns out he visited last weekend. Nobody knew about this until Wednesday morning. That's what made this so freaky when I was doing this last night. And then I wake up Wednesday morning and it turns out he visited here. So it's like, I don't know, there's kind of some psychic connection going on here. I don't know, but ideal candidate for Syracuse at backup. 2 other things for Syracuse football. You can't have enough offensive linemen. There's currently 19 offensive linemen on this roster. You can't have enough. Joe Moore transferred to Arkansas. Listen, if you can add another offensive lineman or two, and Syracuse just brought in Savion Washington from Colorado, and look, that position looks bigger and better. You brought in Darius Weatherspoon, and we can go through all the names that Syracuse has brought in through the portal. Emily and I talked about a bunch of them on the pods. If you can find 1 or 2 more, it never hurts to have more offensive linemen. And I think you need another running back. Remember, Juwan Price transferred out. We know that LaQuint Allen's the starter. We know my guy, Yassine Willis, is going to play and get on the field. Fran Brown himself calls him Thunder and Lightning, but that's a position you probably need another name. And again, if you're in the portal, you want to play. You want to be the guy. But if you can convince that guy, especially if he has a couple years of eligibility, to come in and be like, hang in here, LeQuint is going to go to the NFL eventually. You could be the guy with Willis. You could move up the ladder here. And true athletes want to compete. Come in and see what you can do. Maybe you can shake up the room, right? So that's the football list. Backup quarterback priority, and if they can get Veilleux, that is a big name. Running back, another offensive lineman. To get Justice Ross Simmons, the wide receiver from Colorado State, the Rochester native, was a huge boon for Syracuse. It just adds so much depth to that room. Syracuse lost 8 players to the portal that we know about past the deadline and brought in, if I'm not mistaken, now these are scholarship guys. There's a couple preferred walk-ons and players that are currently not on scholarship that they brought in the portal, but brought in 3 players through that are scholarship guys through the portal. So the numbers are right there. Syracuse is hovering around that 85 scholarship mark. Adrian Autry has 3 scholarships available for basketball. Does it mean he's got to fill all the spots, though? How's the roster looking? And what does basketball need out of the portal? Mike Waters, tell us about that coming up. So on to basketball we go here, Mike, and welcome, by the way, back here to the Syracuse Sports Podcast. Great to see Mike Waters here, ladies and gentlemen. So I posed the question to you. With the deadline passed and everybody that needs to be in the portal in by now, what does the Syracuse basketball team still need, if anything, from the transfer portal?
Well, that's a great question, Brent. If they need anything, I would say 3-point shooting would be at the top of my list. You look at last year's team, they did not shoot the ball well from 3-point range. I think they were 33% as a team. Your only really good 3-point shooter last year was Chris Bell. They've brought in some nice guys. I like who they've brought in the portal so far, but none of them really address that major need of a 3-point shooter, at least not directly. I can explain, but so if they're looking for anything, I would think maybe more 3-point shooting would be at the top of the list. And with the losses of their young bigs, Peter Carey and William Patterson, and then also you lost the guy who started all the games down the stretch for you at center in Malik Brown. So you lost a guy who can play power forward and center. I have to think that if they can find somebody, and there's not many of these guys out there really, but a big, and whether it's a true center or a guy who can play both a little power forward and center for you, just as, if anything, insurance. Because, yes, you're bringing in Eddie Lampkin from Colorado, but your other 5 is Naheem McLeod. And, he's coming off this foot injury. And, as of last Saturday, he was still in a boot. So, you're hoping that, he comes back. But, how much do you want to rely on a 7'4", 250-pound guy with a foot problem? So, I would like to see a little more insurance. The thing is, there's not a lot of people in the portal who are in the portal because they want to be a backup or insurance somewhere. Exactly. All these guys, most of them, they want to play or they want to get paid. So one or the other or both. And so it's really hard to thread that needle of filling, these very niche needs.
We were talking about that a little bit with our football segment, Mike. That's the thing. Syracuse, for example, the football team needs a backup quarterback. Well, if you're in the portal, you're not in the portal to be a backup quarterback. You're thinking you're going to upgrade your position. Now, where you can score here is if you find a player that's maybe got 2 or 3 years of eligibility left. Maybe you don't play right away, but you have the opportunity to play down the road. But to counter that with the position you just brought up, that would seem to me what a William Patterson could be, right? A project, work on your game for a couple of years. Yeah, we brought in this Eddie Lampkin guy, but he's only here for a year. McLeod, his situation, as you mentioned, with the injury, and is he somebody who can really give you 25 to 30 solid minutes? If I'm Patterson, look, I'm not trying to tell these kids what to do, but if he finds a situation where he can play right away, that's the beauty of the portal. But he would seem to be a guy that would benefit if he just did it the old-fashioned way and waited it out. But that's not what happened. So that's the trick with a backup center, with any position where maybe you're not stepping in right away. All these guys are looking to play. So that's what I think Jair Davis is thinking. That's what I think Jaquan Carlos is playing, whether they start or not, given some players that are ahead of them. We'll find out, right? But what we did see last year, Mike, was Adrian, before the injuries and the Benny Williams dismissal happened, Autry does want to go deep on the bench and have a deep rotation here. So I think you can promise the opportunity for playing time, and chances are you're going to get it at Syracuse.
Yeah, it may not be a starting role, but it'll still be a significant role, right? So like you said, before some of the injuries and before Benny left the program, Adrian was very comfortable playing 8, sometimes 9 guys in a game. So that's a decent rotation. So if you're in that rotation, you're good. You go back to the William Patterson thing. I'm like you. It's on the surface, it's sort of hard to understand. Like, he's redshirted. So there's an acknowledgement there that there's some development necessary before Williams really able to play at this level. To come back for next year gives you a chance to develop that game. Now, from the Syracuse coach's standpoint, if the kid's not happy and he's thinking of leaving or something, you're like, might as well just go ahead and go now, because, look what happens when sometimes you do develop a guy. You turn Malik Brown into
right.
ACC all defensive team type of guy who can help in a lot of ways, and he leaves. So, and from William Patterson's point of view, I talked to somebody a little bit. I haven't talked to Will or really anybody within his camp to find out what the reasons were there. But talking to somebody else, an assistant coach in another program, he said, some of these guys, they start thinking, I'm not going to play in the next year or two at Syracuse, so I need to go somewhere, even if it looks like a step down, I can play. And if I play well there, then I take the step back up. Back in the old days, guys transferred once, and that was about all you had, right? Because you had to sit out a year. You weren't going to do that 2 times in your career. Now that you don't have to sit out, we see it all the time. These kids are going to be at 3 or 4 different schools in their college careers.
Mike, you have made this point, and I think we need to reiterate it. Syracuse has 3 scholarships available. That doesn't mean you have to use all 3 of those scholarships. It's a nice benefit. If something happens that swings your way and you feel like you can add a player and, the unexpected happens, it's better to have than not. But I don't think Autry's in the position where it's like, man, by the time the season starts, we got to have all 3 of these spots available, given playing time and things that we're bringing up here. You don't want to develop guys to only see them leave. Now, that being said, you've brought up 2 positions of need that I feel like if Autry can go do it, you do it. That's another guard that has a 3-point shooting acumen and another center. So we brought up and what I don't want to do is go through a million names here because there's just so many in the portal, and we could do an entire podcast just reading the names in the portal and like, do they make sense for Syracuse or not? And maybe I will do that pod at some point. Summer's coming and we'll have some time to fill, but I'm not going to do that today. But at the guard position, there are 2 intriguing names that I do want to discuss. One is Kadari Richmond, right? Kadari Richmond is, according to ESPN, the top-ranked player in the portal now. We know the history. Started here at Syracuse, goes to Seton Hall, becomes an all Big East performer. They win the NIT. Kadari Richmond had a great game in that NIT title game, 21 points, 13 rebounds, physical guard, 6'6", can just run people over. But he still, at this point, Mike, has not developed a 3-point shot. And that's really kind of what's holding him back from being in the draft this year and ultimately being the player that he can be. Given that Syracuse needs 3-point shooting, if Kadari Richmond wants in, and let's say everything's kosher, the money's good, the playing time's good, you mend some fences from before, from when he left the first time around, right? I know Jim Boeheim was the coach then, but let's just say all the deck is clear.
Yeah.
Is Richmond the type of player you want to add if you're Autry?
In one way, he's really not the perfect fit if you're really looking to him, you want a 3-point shooter. He's not that. But you look at everything else he brings, and man, is he a player. And, he can score. He can score on his own. He can rebound. He's a big guard. He defends better than he did when he was in his 1 year at Syracuse. The one way he can help you, though, in 3-point shooting is he creates.
Yes.
He can get better shots for the other guys you have on the floor. And he can do that in a way that Judah Mintz really didn't. Judah Mintz wasn't like a creator passer sort of point guard. Kadari does that a little bit more than Judah did. So without being a great 3-point shooter in his own right, he could help. I couldn't see a way where he could help the team become a better 3-point shooting team. It's not the absolutely perfect fit, but another reason to like that move is, and we can get into this already with what Syracuse has done in the portal. There's a major change from last year to next year. Last year's team, you ended that season with a lineup of all sophomores. You didn't have any seniors that were playing. You didn't have any juniors that were playing because Naheem was hurt and Benny was gone. It was a super young squad. And next year, if you just even start with who they have now, let's say Jaquan Carlos from Hofstra is the starter at the point. He's a senior. JJ Starling is a junior. Chris Bell is a junior. Yes, Donnie Freeman is a freshman, but then Eddie Lampkin is a fifth-year guy. The bench, Jair Davis, fifth-year guy. Kyle Cuff, junior. Chance Westry, older guy, not as much experience playing in college as you want, but older, right? It's going to be a much older team next season, no matter what happens in the portal from this point forward.
That's a great point. And to me, what you're saying and some of those names that you noted, Richmond is intriguing just because he's been here before and the way that it ended. And there's just kind of this full circle moment if you would come back to Syracuse. I know that he wants to play close to home so his mother can see him play. That's why he went to Seton Hall from Syracuse the first time around. Look, NIL is certainly something you got to bring up here. I do think ultimately Syracuse could come up with the money if both parties truly wanted to come together here. You got to sort through all those things. But Mike, in this era, which it feels like it's not even the NBA, because the NBA doesn't even have this kind of turnover sometimes. But when you're building one-year teams, these teams have 1-year expiration dates on them. And then you get to the end of the season, and Malik Brown's a perfect example of that. A couple of players that maybe you didn't see leave, and you just have to reset every year. If that's the kind of team that you need to build, and if Richmond is a possibility, I don't see how you don't do it. I don't think you look at what he can't do. It's what you brought up. I look at what he can do, and I worry about the rest later, particularly with the kind of talent he is. So we'll see where it goes with Richmond. The other name I wanted to bring up here, and what's interesting about both of these names is they're both big guards. Richmond is 6'6". Another name I wanted to bring up is Ken Evans Jr., 6'5" guard, 200 pounds, out of Jackson State. He was the SWAC Player of the Year last year. He averaged close to 19 points, just over 5 rebounds, just under 3 assists. He shot 40% from the field. He shot 39% from three-point range.
Yeah, you go.
So he has been connected to Syracuse. He's one of those names that it's been reported out there. They have at least expressed an interest there. I'm not just looking in the portal saying, hey, that guy looks good. There's actually some mutual interest here. That's an intriguing prospect, Mike. Now, the thing with him, the thing with Carlos, the thing with Davis, and this is the game you play now, can you make that step up, in this case, from the SWAC to the ACC? That's why I like Richmond. That dude played in the Big East. He's got ACC experience. Like, you hit the ground running at a high level. What would the learning curve be for a guy like Davis coming in to the ACC from the SWAC, or do you take that risk, Mike, to steal a phrase from the kids? Hoopers can hoop anywhere, right?
I think in college basketball, I hope fans have learned that there's a lot of guys who can play out there in college basketball. You just look at some of the transfers in recent years that have impacted the ACC. DJ Burns at NC State, I believe off the top of my head, didn't he start his career like Wofford or someplace like that?
Yeah.
Norshad Omier at Miami, but an all ACC quality guy. Arkansas State, is where he came from. So, guys can come. And it's because you got to remember too, when they come from those other schools, they've played 2, 3, sometimes 4 years of college ball. They're 22, 23. They're a lot older than some of the all-star, McDonald's All-Americans they're going to be playing against. So, yeah, guys, you got to go back and look at film. You talk to the people who have seen these guys play in person, and they're like, yeah, he's going to make the transition, no problem. Other times, yeah, you're going to see a situation where maybe a kid, it will be a step up. But depends on what they're asked to do at the next level, right? Are you asked to be a starter? Or do you have just a small role as a starter? We'll see. But there's a lot of guys out there who have impacted the major college level and come from a lower level. So, the Ken Evans Jr. thing coming from Jackson State, the SWAC. I heard that Syracuse they made a phone call. I don't know if it's gone anywhere since then, though. So it's from my end. I don't know how much they're moving on him yet. It might be, and that was some work I did like 2 days ago. And I was also kind of led to believe that you might not hear a lot for the next 24, 48 hours until the portal actually closes. Because I think the Syracuse coaches wanted to be careful not to like go all in on somebody. And, they wanted to see the entire field in the portal, if you will.
Which is smart.
And so now we'll start to see, okay, who are they really moving on? Is it a guy they like from a lower level? Is it someone like a Kadari Richmond? We know Kadari's going to command a lot of NIL money. And we don't know, because it's a private school and the collectives are very, cautious about giving out their financials. But we don't know how much Syracuse has. And, I've heard rumors. I know you've talked to some people. We think it's shadowy. We think we know some numbers, but Kadari, in any case, Kadari's going to cost a good portion of that SU budget, if you will.
No question about it.
And it'll depend on some of the other schools. And then you get into what Kadari wants as well, and would he go to school B for less money than he goes to school A? We'll see, but that would be intriguing. That'd be a little bit of a storyline, wouldn't it?
Just a little bit in the no off-season era we are in college sports. Mike, I'm going to close with this thought, and I'm going to reiterate the names just to get them back on people's brains here, okay? So these are the players that left to go to the portal or elsewhere for Syracuse. Malik Brown, Judah Mintz, Quadir Copeland, Peter Carey, William Patterson, Justin Taylor, Monir Hema, and then Benny Williams I'll put on that list, who we knew was leaving but is off the roster from last year. This is your current roster. Carlos, Cuff, Starling, Westry, Moore. We didn't even mention Chance Westry before. Elijah Moore, the incoming freshman. Chris Bell, Donnie Freeman, who, by the way, is going to be the highest-rated incoming freshman since Carmelo Anthony, now that he's up in top 5, 6 lists on a couple of different ranking. Jair Davis, Eddie Lampkin, Naheem McLeod. Let's just say, Mike, that's what you're going with. They don't add another guard. They don't add another center. They hold the line at that roster with 3 scholarships available. Can you feel good about that? Can you go in saying, we're good? As Gene Hackman said in Hoosiers, my team's on the floor. That's what I'm going with.
I think you can feel good. You might not feel great. I think it's a good team. I think you got good players. I think you've made marginal improvements in a couple of areas, and you'd have to hope that that's enough to maybe, let you get into the NCAA tournament next year. Will you fight for a bid with that team? It's not a team that's going to compete for an ACC tournament regular season crown anyway. But I think you've improved in some ways at center. You've given yourself a true low post threat, a guy you can throw the ball to in the low post, and he can work with his back to the basket. You didn't have that last year. And that's another way, in a small way, you become a better three-point shooting team. Because if you throw the ball into a big guy down low and he's got his back to the basket, if a double team comes, it means he's looking right back out to kick the ball to shooters. And shooters love getting that pass back out to them from the post. So does J.J. Starling become a better shooter? Does Jair Davis shoot the ball better than, say, Quadir Copeland did? Because they were similar in their three-point shooting last year. So, if Quadir was still here, I would say, would Quadir shoot the ball better getting passes from the post from an Eddie Lampkin? I would wager he would. So I'm thinking maybe Jair Davis will shoot the ball better than he has in the past, perhaps. Chris Bell's going to love getting a couple of maybe open looks, right? So, we'll see how they do. Donnie Freeman at the 4 versus a Justin Taylor. Listen, I don't know how much, we want to put on an incoming freshman, but he is a McDonald's All-American.
Yeah.
And Justin struggled last year. I really liked Justin Taylor, but if we just go off his production last year, you hope Donnie Freeman gives you more. Chris Bell's the same, comes back, hopefully he's not worse, right? J.J. Starling comes back, same thing. You hope for improvement. Does he become a more consistent three-point shooter? Stuff like that. And then you got the point guard. And you're losing Judah Mintz, who was a fantastic player, great talent, leading scorer, all ACC caliber guy. And what are you going to do with that position? Is JJ going to move over to the point a little? Is Carlos out of Hofstra going to be a guy? If it is him, I tell you what, there's a few things on paper I like about Carlos. I love his assist to turnover ratio. It's fantastic. And he averaged over 6 assists a game last year, and his turnovers were like 2 a game. I mean, basically a 3-to-1 assist to turnover ratio, far better than any Syracuse guard had last year. So is he creating for those other guys, right? I also love the fact that he's older. He'll be a senior. I'm partial to New York City point guards, Brent. I don't know if you knew that about me.
I do know this. Yeah.
He's from Brooklyn. He went to Thomas Jefferson High School. So give me a tough New York City point guard any day of the week, and I'll fight you, right? This will be fun. I think back to not even guys at Syracuse. Well, Alan Griffin was a New York City point guard. Adrian Autry was a New York City point guard. But guys like Carlos Krauser at Pitt and Brandon Knight, I know he's Jersey, but he's that same area. So we'll see.
There's something to that. There's definitely something to that.
I don't care. There definitely is the thing about New York City guards.
Michael, it's always great to talk hoops with you, even here on May 1st. Doesn't matter if it's May 1st, June 1st, July 1st, or during the season. We're going to be keeping an eye on this because the portal is closed technically, but if your name was in there before May 1st, then you are in play to still be portaled somewhere else. So we'll see what Syracuse does on that front. We'll be all over for you here on Syracuse Sports and on syracuse.com as well. Thanks for the insight as always, my friend. We'll catch up soon.
It's always good chatting with you, Brent. We'll see you soon.
You have heard from me. You have heard from Mike Waters. Now let's hear from you, our Syracuse Sports insiders. And it is a great time to be a Syracuse Sports insider. Like, man, Brent, summer's coming. It's May. What's going to be going on? Whatever's going on in terms of news, my opinions, thoughts. We're going to get creative with topics here on the Syracuse Sports Podcast, and we are going to need you to be a part of that. So being a Syracuse Sports insider is a 12-month-a-year thing. We would love for you to be a part of it. If you're already a Syracuse Sports insider, you know how much we thank you for that. Why don't you join now? And you could do it for 2 weeks, absolutely free. Try it out. All you have to do is text the word orange to 315-847-3895. After that, it's just $3.99 a month, less than $1 a week, to be a part of the Syracuse Sports Insider community, including this cool benefit. We highlight your comments, your questions, your thoughts on the podcast. And you guys had plenty of thoughts on what both Syracuse football and basketball needs to do still in the transfer portal, including Paul L., who says, for Fran, you can never have enough depth at both the offensive and defensive line, especially now that Joe Moore transferred to Arkansas. For Red, I agree that they need another center. I think they're okay at guard, even without a Kadari Richmond. There you go. From Brian T., who says, in my opinion, Syracuse could use another power forward who could drive, rebound, and be a tight defender, preferably a guy with 3 years of eligibility. And I think that's the key, Brian. We brought it up earlier. The guys you're looking for, you can't add one-and-done guys. You got to do that. Eddie Lampkin, for example, the center that Syracuse brought in from Colorado. Totally need to do it. Kyle McCord at quarterback, right? Totally necessary. But if you can find the guys that have 2, maybe sometimes 3 years of eligibility, maybe they don't come right in and make an impact, but they'll have an opportunity to compete down the road to do that. You kind of acclimate them a little bit, get some PT, and then become the guy. I think you got to look for more of those players. Not that the one-and-done guys don't make an impact, aren't necessary. You have to spend the money for it. Like, that's the game today. But I think you make a great point on that. From Jake M., who says, can this all point guard coaching staff stop with the guards? What we need is a Charles Oakley type rebounder. Maybe I'm a little old school, but rebounds matter, kids. From Mark C., who says a third guy who can play center is critical. Can't feel too warm and fuzzy about McLeod and Lampkin splitting 40 minutes every game for 5 months, and I don't think any of the forwards can be an emergency guy. From Jim M., who says it's inevitable that a starting quarterback may miss some games due to an injury. We need a strong backup. Searching the portal for such a player, I believe, is still a need. From Al S., first and foremost, Red needs a pass-first point guard. Next, a backup center. Now, Carlos does fit that pass-first mentality. We brought it up with Mike, the assist-to-turnover ratio. He's more of a facilitator than a scorer, so you have that. Still need the backup center at that point. Al notes this. Lastly, preferably in the front court, Syracuse needs a knockdown three-point shooter. Mike Waters brought that up. Someone near the 45% level that can be a real weapon off the bench. Bill from Florida says, I believe Brown should look for a big, versatile offensive lineman, especially with a pocket quarterback. I think Autry should continue to look for a big, athletic center. From Tim A., who says, for Fran Brown, backup quarterback, it's been a popular theme from you guys. For Autry, I would say a wing or a guard who can shoot, and a center who has more than a year left, which is what we talked about with Patterson. I don't begrudge you. You think you can find another opportunity, go chase it, kid. But I think after this season, Patterson would have moved into a bigger role, but we'll see if he finds his opportunity elsewhere. From Willie M., who says, I know finding a center will be tough. My thought is maybe we can find an older junior college or maybe a D2 big with lots of experience who maybe is open to a Syracuse scholarship and a smaller NIL deal. And we'll close with Frankie S., who says, quarterback for sure, and you can never have enough hogs up front. For hoops, Kadari Richmond, Ken Evans Jr., basically another big guard / small forward who can shoot and defend. Great feedback, as always, from you guys, our Syracuse Sports Insiders. We would love for you to become a part of the community today. And for those of you that are a part of the Syracuse Sports Insider community, thank you, as always, for your great feedback, your questions, your opinions, your thoughts. Just want to talk sports? That's what I'm there for. Being a Syracuse Sports Insider gives you direct text access to me anytime. Cut through the social media clutter. Get the news and information and opinion straight from me that you want. Become a Syracuse Sports Insider today. I'd like to remind you to please subscribe on Spotify, Apple, YouTube, wherever you get your podcasts so you know when new episodes of Syracuse Sports pops up. We would greatly appreciate that. That's all we have for you today, my friends. We'll keep it going here. It's May 1st, May Day, but still a lot to talk about on the Syracuse Sports front. Thanks for hanging with us here on Syracuse Sports. We'll catch you next time.